Hey guys, okay, so we're back. And remember, Hezekiah, the king, he's king of Judah, lives in Jerusalem, had formed alliances with the other kingdoms so that they could break free from Assyria. And Assyria's king is named Sennacherib, okay? And Prophet Isaiah had warned against this. Prophet Isaiah thought relying on pagan kingdoms never turned out well, that wasn't Yahweh's plan. To rely on Yahweh alone was the way to go. Well, word came. Sennacherib was on the march. Hezekiah worried. Was he coming to attack Judah? It had been 4 years since he'd stopped paying tribute money. Was this finally it? Was this the time? Well, he knew that all the kingdoms had agreed with him, that they would all form an alliance together. So he called his advisors together and they all said, no, we're fine. Egypt has promised to help you. All these others, we will take the Assyrians down. Still, Hezekiah spent time walking in his garden, thinking. He'd always relied on Isaiah. This is the first time that he had gone against Isaiah's advice. Isaiah said, they're going to fail you. All of these kingdoms don't have an alliance with you. When they are up against Assyria, they will turn back. But Hezekiah listened to his advisors and he said, no, we know they have enough. We're all joined in this together. And finally, it came. The Assyrian army word came that the Assyrian army was attacking Sidon, one of the nations that Hezekiah had formed an alliance with. This was it. That valley would be a perfect place to stage a battle. All of their troops would come together. All the kingdoms around would send troops. And the king of Assyria had sent a message to Hezekiah asking him if he was going to create peace again and go back to paying the tribute money. So Hezekiah sent messages all throughout the land to all the other kingdoms. Send your troops, it's time. If we gather in the Sidon Valley, we know we can take down Assyria. And so the troops went out in a flurry of activity, and Hezekiah waited for their response. And one by one, the responses came. They weren't coming. They said, if Assyria is on the march, we have to keep our troops around to protect our own cities. We can't go help a city far away. We need our troops here at home. What would happen if they broke through the ranks and came to our cities? We'd have nothing left. We can't leave our cities now with Assyria on the run. On the warpath. We have to stay at home and protect our own cities. They were really hoping that Assyria just wouldn't come to them. Well, Hezekiah then ordered his own troops to go, and worse news came. His own troops wouldn't go. Sidon wasn't their territory, and they said they weren't going to leave. The generals wouldn't command the troops to not fight for their own country. Well, when Hezekiah sent a message to the king of Sidon, word came back. It was too late. Assyrians had attacked the city there, had ransacked it, and they were taken captives and were headed home, and were sending the captives home. The message came back as they watched as women and children and old men were being marched north with their animals, and the Assyrian army was burning down the city. Just the king had escaped. Oh man, Hezekiah knew this was bad news. As one by one, the Assyrian army started traveling south, city after city. Some of them sent word ahead even that they were willing to join back on, to start paying tribute money back to Assyria, and so they could just come in. And city after city went down. Some were ransacked, some were taken as slaves, and some were just joined in an alliance. Finally, it came time for the Philistine cities, the ones that had already lost to Jerusalem. Well, by this time, the Egyptian army had arrived. Sure enough, it turns out that the army from Egypt that had formed an alliance, they were the only ones to honor that alliance with Hezekiah and come and fight against the troops at the Philistine capital city. And the fighting went on as messages went back and forth that the Egyptians and the Assyrians were deadlocked in a battle. Back and forth went the fighting day after day. The swords and the arrows and the horses and the chariots. And Hezekiah just prayed and prayed that Egypt would be the champion. But word came that the Egyptian army finally bulged and the Assyrian army was able to break through the ranks and win. Oh, Hezekiah knew this was bad news. Some of the Egyptians ran for Jerusalem, and Hezekiah had sent some of his troops into battle there as well. Hezekiah joined in, tried to help, but it was too late. Hezekiah and some of his troops managed to escape back to Jerusalem. This was an old tactic. This tactic that the Assyrian king was using had been used for generations before. If there was a big kingdom to attack, first take down all the smaller kingdoms around it, so there were no more chance of anybody else forming an alliance together and leave that one last big kingdom standing on their own. Once you'd taken down all the others, there was nobody left to help. Hezekiah made his way back to Jerusalem. He was thankful for his life, but he wasn't sure what would happen next. He wasn't sure. He knew he had formed alliances. Why had everybody turned their back on him? What should he do? Should he start paying tribute money? Was it too late? Hezekiah called the rest of the troops together in Jerusalem and started talking to the generals. And they were talking to him and said, "Your Majesty, it's too late. Our troops have seen their chariots, have seen their horses. They've destroyed the morale of this army. Nobody wants to fight Assyria anymore. They have all the superior weapons." Hezekiah couldn't argue that this was true. He thought about a siege. Could they survive a siege? Was the tunnel done enough? Hezekiah needed to check. They needed to get more food together. How long would they live through a siege? Was it better to go out and attack? But it was true. The Assyrian army was stronger. Hezekiah didn't know how it had come to this. He thought he'd had an alliance. He thought he'd had allies and help, and even Egypt had come to help. But it was too little, too late. So Hezekiah called his advisors together. It looked like Assyria wasn't going to come right away. They too had to pick up their wounded from the battlefields. They left the Egyptian wounded and dead, and it was strewn all about as Hezekiah had ridden back to the city. He had seen this. But the Assyrian army had taken their own and were taking a minute to gather their own strength. Hezekiah hoped they'd turn around and go north and leave him alone, but he knew there was very little chance of that. And so he spent time wondering and thinking, what should he do next? Should he face them in battle? His troops didn't seem ready. Or should they wait out a siege? Did they have enough supplies? Would they end up starving his people? Would the families and the women and the children inside the gates live through a siege? Was it too late to pay tribute money again? Or is people willing to do that? Would he lose his place as king? What was the best thing? Well, word came. Assyria was on the march again. But it didn't look like they were headed for Jerusalem. There were smaller cities in Judah to conquer first. It looked like Assyria was going to take down one by one all the other cities of Judah before attacking the capital of Jerusalem. And we're going to have to wait till next time to hear what happens next. All right. I hope to see you guys again soon. Do your prayer requests with your teachers, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.